Hello everybody, I'm Kate Bergstrom, Associate Commissioner at the America East Conference, and welcome to this episode of the Three Pillars Academy. I'm here with Julie Soriero, Director of Athletics at MIT. Julie's in her 12th year at the helm of MIT, and actually just recently was the recipient of the NCAA President's Pat Summitt Award in 2018. Incredibly impressive honor there.
Thank you.
So we're thrilled to have Julie here, so thanks for carving out some time to talk to us.
Thank you, my pleasure to be here.
So today we're going to be discussing crisis management, and Julie's going to be sharing a little bit about the experiences that she's had in a leadership role and what that's happened at her department and the changes that she's made in terms of communication and how we handle crisis, and hopefully leave the audience with some takeaways that you can bring back to your campus. So let's jump in. For those that don't know about the stories that have happened in 2013 on your campus and in the greater city of Boston, maybe we can start a little bit by providing some background and talking about the incident that happened, or the two incidences.
Sure. Well, everybody is pretty familiar, or should be still familiar, with the horrible incident that happened at the Boston Marathon bombing. But prior to that, we had an incident on our campus that at the time was very frightening, but also at the time it ended up being very important to us in the long run. So in February of 2013, the Boston Marathon bombing obviously was in April, we had an alert went out that said we had a shooter on campus. And we went into a lockdown. And so the whole campus went into a lockdown because there were all sorts of rumors about where the shooter was and what sort of armaments this person had and so on. So we went into a lockdown. It turned out to be a false alarm, fortunately. But at that time, no one knew that. So as a campus, we had to react. And as we reacted to it and then debrief, we realized we really weren't ready for an emergency. We weren't ready for the definitions of shelter in place versus lockdown. We weren't ready for what it meant to secure your building. We weren't ready for the communication systems that went out that said that locked everything down or gave it all clear. And following that incident, we had a huge period of debriefing across campus, our department, athletics, but also across campus with student life, DSL, Division of Student Life Leadership, etc. And we realized where we had some gaps. And everything from some places were in lockdown, some people were in shelter in place. And the difference is, if you're in shelter in place, you open the doors and you let people in. If you're in a lockdown, you lock the doors and no one gets in and nobody gets out. So we found out we really weren't clear on those communications and what that meant. We weren't clear on how to give an all clear when we knew that everything was done and who has what information. In our building alone, we were open and we put up signs that particular day that said the building is temporarily closed. So people stood outside and waited, even though there was allegedly a gunman on campus. They stood outside and waited because the idea of temporarily, they thought, well, any minute this building could open and I want to get in for my workout. So we were torn between, okay, we're in a lockdown, but should we bring these people into our building? So we needed to clear, as a campus, we needed to clear everything up. And the same things were happening in the residential halls, the same things with the text messages that were going out. We discovered that in order to get a text message alert, it was an opt-in situation and not all across the board. So we've changed how we've done that. Now it's an opt-out situation. Anyway, it proved to be a valuable exercise that the debrief did. So now it gets to be April, and we have the horrible incident of the bombing at the Boston Marathon. And if anybody is from Massachusetts, they know that it's a free day here. It's Patriots Day, and everything is closed, and there are no classes at MIT, so a lot of our students volunteer down at the marathon, at the race course and the finish line and so on. And we have this horrible incident on news, and our campus was obviously shaken by it. We didn't go into a lockdown or shelter in place, but how do you put the systems in place to check on your staff, your students, and so on? I happened to be at the management council meetings in Indianapolis, and I couldn't get in touch with everybody. I couldn't get a conference call going. So that was the first thing we learned. We now have a 24/7 conference call that's just for our senior staff, that if we have any emergency, we can access it immediately. But at the time, I was calling everybody independently, and we were trying to figure out where our student athletes, are they back on campus? Was anybody hurt? Do we know anybody that was injured, etc. Hard enough and difficult enough, but then three days later, I believe it was, the Boston bombers came onto our campus, and they murdered our police officer, Sean Collier. And they essentially were trying to get his gun, and when he wouldn't give it up, they shot him. Our campus immediately went into a lockdown, and this was about 3 blocks from our campus. And we knew everybody knew what they were doing then when it went to a lockdown. So our building went into a lockdown situation. I don't live that far from campus. This was about 10:30 at night when this occurred. So I went into our building at the time, and I saw some very, very frightened students. We had about 30 students who were still in our building, and a couple staff members who were working out later at night. And I went into the building, and based upon the February incident, some of the things we did wrong, and then the bombing at the marathon, and then now a lockdown, and everybody knew it was the bombers. I mean, it was sort of evident. There were a lot of rumors that it was a robbery gone bad, etc. But everybody's fear in their back of their mind before it was confirmed was that it was the bombers. So I walked into a building with very, very frightened students and made it very clear, we are in a lockdown. No one is getting into this building. Nobody is leaving this building until we have it all clear from our police department, not from the Boston News, not from the Cambridge police, from our police department, the MIT police. And we held very true to that. So we had people at the doors because the students came up, they wanted to go back to their dorms. And their ideas were, well, let us out 3 at a time and we'll run real fast. Meanwhile, in the background, the police sirens are going and the helicopters are going. And I mean, it's just chaos right on all over our campus. But our students wanted to, and I get that. You want to go where it's safe and secure, and that's where you live, and so on. So we were there a couple hours, and one of the things I learned is that you've got to make your group comfortable. So as I left my house, I brought my phone charger. I wasn't quite sure how long I was going to be there. And I had a student walk up to me and said, my phone is dead, I'd love to call my mom. And I realized, okay, this is one way to bring a little bit of comfort. So I made an announcement to the 30 people that were there, please, if you have a phone charger, bring it forward. Let's be able to get phones charged so people can reach out. I sent some of our staff to go get water. I sent some people upstairs to go get yoga mats so people could lay down, because now we're moving into 12, 1 o'clock, etc. And if you followed what happened, the bombers hijacked a car and moved into Watertown, and it was like a war zone all around MIT's campus and all up and down Memorial Drive. But that was the incident that really tested what we had learned in February. And really, the debrief from that, we learned from that. Every time an incident occurs, you learn more. So, for example, we have a locker in our gymnasium area that's just all for emergency situations. So we have reflective vest, we have extension cords, now we have power surges and some chargers, so that although chargers always change, but we at least have surge. What are they called? Help me out. Surge protectors, yeah. So that we can get everybody's phones charged and people can get information out. But it was a really difficult situation to be in at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and Julie, one of the things you've said over and over again between the February incident and then what happened in April is this idea of debrief. But there's so many different things that are coming to you at once. When you're going through that debrief process, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What are the key things that you have to hit on with your staff and other key campus partners to have a really productive debrief?
Yeah. I'll get to that in a minute, because we postponed our debrief. We had the incident, and then it was clear that we had to do something. We had to grieve as a campus because of Officer Collier's murder. And when you have an incident like that around these circumstances, it was very clear that this was going to be a large funeral and a large memorial service on our campus. And any space that's big enough to hold a number of people and thousands of police officers coming in from all over the country is in athletics. So we went from trying to react to this to now helping people plan the funeral for Officer Collier, which was our police. It was Secret Service, because Joe Biden came in that particular day. It was making sure there were enough metal detectors and so on to be able to scan the crowd. You couldn't get into it without a metal detector. But I also want to be clear about this. We as a campus needed to grieve. So although you look at a debrief and it's the checks and balances of getting through that situation, how you handle the emotional turmoil of something like that. A lot of our student athletes knew Officer Collier. Our police and our student athletes and our coaches all get along. They're wonderful members of our community. So how do you deal with that? And you want your coaches to be strong, yet at the same time, you know that they might need some support too. And the one area where I know in the debrief I admitted that I didn't do a very good job with is making sure our coaches and staff knew where to go for support. But it was really, really important that we planned this the right way and we grieved as a campus. So I wouldn't let any team leave our area because they shut down all our fields. We couldn't practice, we couldn't play, etc. I wouldn't let any team leave our campus till after the memorial service. So wherever they were going to play, home or away, we were not leaving till, I think it was a bus was not departing till 2:30. And I really want to take a moment to acknowledge the wonderful colleagues in the Boston area, because anything we needed, they gave us. So if we needed a practice field, they said, tell me what time you want to be there. If we needed to move a game from a Wednesday to a Thursday or change it from away to home, everybody was just, remarkably cooperative and remarkably supportive. I mean, people knew what we were going through. So it was an email, it was a text, and hopefully people on our campuses don't have to deal with this. But if you do know someone who's going through it, pick up the phone and call them. Send an email, let them know you're thinking, because it meant so much to me. So I'm going to get back to your question about the debrief now. What are some of the things we talked about? Well, you start with what do we do well and what do we need to do better? And, it was very clear. I came in that night, but then also our director of recreational services came in because we cleared, it was a mistake, but we cleared all the people in the building to the pool area. Now, it was a mistake because when you go into a lockdown, you should go to a section of the building where there's no windows. But we had a very young staff, and they just brought everybody into the pool. It was probably the easiest place to put everybody, and we had more staff there because of lifeguards versus people up on a recreational floor. So we talked about that. Should we have moved people from the pool area to the indoor track? And we said probably not, because we might have lost people en route. We talked about the need for people to be able to communicate outside. We talked about the value of drawing a hard line, that we were not going to let anybody go until we heard from our police. We talked about trying to make people comfortable. We talked about the frequency with which we communicated with people who were in that pool area in the lockdown situation. We talked about what's in our emergency area that we need to make sure we have enough of. So that's when the power surges came out. We talked too about making sure that our staff knows where to get water and cups and everything else to make people comfortable. I mean, we were there till about 3 o'clock in the morning. So, the staff did a great job, but you can also do better.
Talk to me a little bit about your staff. You mentioned the importance of that conference call line,
yeah,
and the ability to communicate with your senior staff. And so talk to me about the keeping that sort of network, at least in the initial stages of a crisis, close. How do you decide on who you bring into the fold?
Yeah, I think you bring in people that have the decision-making power and have the information you need. I've always said in a crisis, you need to pay attention to what you know, what you don't know, and what you need to find out. And those three things, and I'll say them again because they're so critically important: what you know, what you don't know, and what you need to find out. And you bring in the people that can help you determine what those things are. So who knows what about where are the people in this building? Okay, if I don't know when this is going to end, but how do we find that out? Who's in touch with the police? And what I need to find out is there anybody else in this building? I'm using that particular situation as an example. So knowing those three critical things and having the right people in place is very, very important. And then the next piece of it is, how do we communicate beyond the immediate group that we have? What's going on the website? What is going posted on our I said, for example, when we had the alleged shooter on campus, the false alarm, we had building is temporarily closed. Well, who's putting the signs up that says building is closed, now go to, now we direct people to the MIT emergency website? right? So who's putting those things up so that if someone was trying to get a late workout in, now this is a bad example because everybody knew the entire campus was in a lockdown, but if our building had just gone into a lockdown for some reason, how is that being communicated? You need the people who help you with the messaging, and the people who have the information should be the people, the inner circle that you're having that conversation with.
And emergency action plan, I mean, that's a document that exists to help sort of create guidelines for, your staffs, other cross-campus partners. Talk to me about, one, maybe the creation of that document or different iterations of it after these experiences, and sort of what the communication plan with that document is, whether that's on an annual basis or how often, at which frequency with your staff you're doing that.
That's a great question, because we just talked about that in a meeting today, that maybe it's time to revisit it because we have new staff, we have staff that need to be reminded, etc. But we had started on the emergency action plan before these incidents happened. And it really was motivated, unfortunately, by a number of bus accidents that had occurred with athletic teams, some here in New England. And we said, hey, are we prepared if a bus goes off the highway and we have injuries? And we sort of said, maybe not. What does that mean? Who do we need to contact on that? Do we contact the police? Do we contact the dean on call, which is our campus-wide emergency contact situation? What about contacting parents? So we started that conversation before all of these incidents occurred. We were probably about halfway through our emergency action plan, not focused on either one of these incidents, focused more on something happening with an athletic team being on the road. So we said, okay, we'll put that aside. Let's talk about this for a moment now, when all of those things occurred. But what we wanted in our emergency action plan, a lot of people have a thick emergency action plan, and if A happens, do B, and if C happens, do D, etc. We wanted a flow chart. So we have a flow chart so that if anything happens, you can flip it open and okay, if I call Julie, Julie's going to call so-and-so. If I call an associate AD, he or she is going to call this person, who in turn will call Julie, who's going to call so-and-so. So we've got a really intricate flow chart, but it's easy to follow. One of the things that came out of this, and I'm very happy to say we have it, is a card that's about this big. And the font is small, but on this card, you have my cell phone number, the associate AD's cell phone number, the insurance company's cell phone number, dean on call, MIT police, any number you would need for any incident that would occur, everything from a fender bender to a bus going off the highway, so that our coaches have it and our team captains have it. When we originally handed it out, we handed out to only our head and assistant coaches. And then we realized, what do we do if something happens to them? So we made sure captains had it. And then it's up to the coach. It's their prerogative if they want to give it out beyond that. So our teams have an emergency access card. So if something happens, they know exactly who to call and what they need to do.
Athletics, obviously, they don't live in a silo. So how do you stay aligned with the greater university? Obviously, I've heard from other experts in the industry and other ADs that are sitting in that same chair that the president is often the first person they call in, a crisis, depending on what that crisis is. Talk to me about your experience with that.
Yeah. Well, when we were doing this emergency action plan, we brought in and did tabletop exercises with legal counsel, our police, our emergency response system, our dean on call system, etc., so that they knew that we weren't operating and developing a plan that was just out of sync with what they do. We wanted to make sure that there were intersections with what MIT already had in place. For example, if a bus goes off the highway, who's going to that city where the bus might have gone off the highway to make sure to set up, sort of a triage of what's going on down there. So we needed to contact the police. Our police would contact their police, and how do we get somebody down there, and who's going down, etc. Those were critical conversations to have. And I think sometimes as an athletic department, you do this in isolation, and all of a sudden something happens and you realize, hey, we need to involve so-and-so and so-and-so, and they don't know what you're doing. So the more you can get ahead of it, the better off you are. And we're having a conversation on our campus now and in our department about a violent intruder or a shooter on campus, and involving the police and bringing someone in who's an expert in that for the run, hide, fight program that MIT has, but it's also across the country, to talk about what exactly does this mean. So the partnerships are critically important, not only for the incident, but then for what happens when you get home. All right, who are the partners you need to be involved in for emotional support for your student athletes, or for an injured student athlete, or for the coaches who might have been traumatized by an incident that occurred. So those are also equally valuable partners to have involved in these conversations.
Talk to me about technology in terms of how technology plays into crises. You've mentioned a couple different things, even from phone chargers, to conference call lines, to text message in and opt out alerts and whatnot.
Yeah.
How, what are maybe some lessons that you've learned, but on top of that, what are some situations that can be avoided, with sort of better technology practices?
Yeah. Wow, that is a really tough question. Well, the good news with technology is it can be very, very helpful. The bad news is instantaneous. I think where technology helps you is get a 24-hour, 7 days a week, it belongs to you, not anybody else, emergency number that you can use. Now, we have it just for our athletic department, but if my athletic trainer needed to do an emergency call with just his staff, he can access it, right? But it's not something that our coaches could have a conference call with their whole team on, right? But it's something that we have solely for emergencies. It's been critically important, and we test it every year. This year, I made my staff test it on a Sunday morning. I said, we're not going to test it 9 to 5 when everybody's sitting in their office. We're going to test it at times when we would be challenged. So we did it at 11 o'clock on a Sunday. I made it at 11:15 actually. On the hour, half hour is too easy. So we did that. A couple people missed it, and they forgot they did this. So we had a second call for those people who missed it. But we test it every year. It's never failed us since 2013, but we test it every year just to make sure there's no problem. So that's the first thing. I think another thing that is important is determine who in your group is in the need to know component of it, so that when an incident occurs, you're ready to respond. So those are two, I think, really important technology things that need to be taken away, right? Who's the communication system, and then identifying with the communication system who's in the need to know. How you message is really, really important. We have a standard message that goes out that has all the links to MIT Medical, Student Support Services, etc. So if our student athletes need support, we can send it right immediately as soon as the incident has occurred. That has, here's the message about the incident, here are the support services. I have the same thing to my staff. This is the incident that's occurred, here's the support services. Please forward such, and if they haven't, reminding them again to forward something to their student athletes. So there's a mass communication that's very helpful with technology. There's information that can be a little bit private because a student can click on the link if they want to or not want to. But the social media aspect really makes it, you've got to respond immediately, and you, as I said, what you know, what you don't know, and what I need to find out is critically important in messaging it and moving it forward. When you're the leader, that information needs to come from you. How you set the tone is critically important. And you need to be calm, and you need to be direct, and you need to delegate appropriately, and you need to follow up. I know when I went into the building after the incident with Officer Collier occurred, I stood up on some bleachers and said, listen to all the 30 people that were here, here's what's going on, right? And because they were working out, they really didn't know any of it. And their phones started beeping, so they knew that we were in a lockdown. And I said, in no uncertain terms, no one is leaving this building till we have an all clear from the MIT police, right? And I was very clear about that because our students were found a way to tap into some of the police scanners. So they came to me and they said, well, we understand that the bombers are up in Watertown now, and that there's shootout going on and all the horrible things that happened on that particular evening. And I was very direct with them. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. We are not leaving till we get an all clear from our police. So you've got to be direct. You can't waver. You've got to be firm in your commitment to how you're going to handle it as a leader. And then that needs to be communicated to your staff.
Julie, if you could leave the audience with just a couple maybe key takeaways from how you deal with crisis management as a leader.
Yeah. Well, there's an irony here because I've spoken about this on a number of occasions. And what I hope is that, you always do, you listen to a webcast or podcast, or you go to professional development and you think, oh, I'm going to take this back and do this on my campus. I hope no one ever has to use anything that I'm talking about today, because that means there's a catastrophe that's occurred, and you've got to react to it. So there's the irony of it. But the lessons learned is don't delay talking about it on your campus, at least with your senior leadership team. Have the conversation, and then from there, take it beyond. We started with our senior leadership team in athletics, and then we said, and asked the question, who else do we need to get involved? And that's where it became legal counsel and police and so on. And let it spread so that everybody knows what you're doing, and you know what they're doing, so that where there's overlap, you're going to get help if you have a catastrophic event. And let's be honest, in athletics, there's probably more risk and more exposure than many other parts of campus. So you need to be prepared. So the second takeaway is start that preparation now, but then come up with a plan that will work for you and your campus. These cards are great. And if anybody wants to call me or email me, I will send them the sample of the card we have, because that was it wasn't my idea. I don't know who thought about it, but it was a brilliant idea. But I'd be happy to share it, because it's reassuring too to your staff that if there's an accident, I don't have to try to fumble around my phone and find Julie's number, and maybe I didn't put it in, and I have her office but not her cell, etc. They have an action plan that they can follow. And once they call, then we have that flow chart that makes it happen. The other piece that I think is an important takeaway, get a call number 24/7 that you can access. As I said, I was at meetings when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, and I was in Indianapolis, and it was after 5 o'clock. So I could not call our operator back at MIT and said, I need to set up a conference call. So if you don't have a 24/7 thing, freeconferencecall.com, they'll make it happen for you. And I don't work for them. I get no piece of that action at all. But I really think that it's important to have something in place. And then the last thing is don't be afraid to talk about it. Debrief once something happens. And as I said, we started to debrief about the incident last week, and it reminded us we haven't talked about this for a while. So let's bring it back to the forefront of what we're talking about as a staff, so that everybody's prepared in the event something happens again.
Well, Julie, thanks so much for your stories and your expertise. Really appreciate it. Thanks for staying with us.
Great to be here. Thanks.